10. Cops and Robbers. For a moment, Sheriff Wilson sat in his Interceptor patrol vehicle and eyed the green truck in dismay. The doors had a Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency logo painted in big white lettering with the telltale seal. A light bar was attached to its top. Diane's car was parked beside it. "Damn," the sheriff said out loud to himself. "I hope Holiday isn't here. That could complicate everything. That son of a bitch would snitch out his own grandma." He fought the urge to call his boys back. Bill Holiday, one of the county's longest-serving TWRA officers, was a crack shot and known to be a hard-ass. He was ex-military and willing to shoot first, ask questions later. The sheriff picked up his radio, tuned to his private channel. "Do you boys know where Holiday is this evening?" Sheriff Wilson asked. "If he's here, don't tangle with him, you hear?" Static came over the radio handset as he paused with it close to his face. "Yeah, boss," came the answer. "I saw him in town earlier, but it looks like he was headed out to his farm." "Then why is that TWRA truck parked in Stanley's driveway?" the sheriff inquired. Staring hard at it wasn't making it go away as he wished. "She's working for him now, sir," another voice said. "That you, Bennett?" The sheriff pushed up his hat and wiped his forehead. He shoved his hat back down on his forehead and leaned back in his seat. "Yes, sir," Officer Bennett replied. "Ah, hell, when did you become aware?" The sheriff held the radio close to his mouth. There was no way to deny the identity of the truck. "Earlier today, sir," Bennett's voice crackled over the radio. "Do not abort mission. Take Stanley into custody. If she resists, give her hell," Wilson told his men. "Boss," the radio crackled in reply. "Diane got some of my boys killed and started giving me bullshit stories. We're through playing. She'll either come quiet like, or we'll end it the old-fashioned way," the sheriff ordered smugly. "Roger that," came the immediate reply over the radio. "Rough her up a little and add resisting arrest." Sheriff Wilson bared his teeth in a grim mockery of a smile. "Whatever you feel like. Maybe she'll talk with some justified force." Sheriff Wilson watched the well-oiled machine he'd created from his hand-picked men with pride. A wave of deep anger simmered in his heart. He'd lost people, good friends, and nobody could or would give him answers. He knew there were answers to be had, but nothing made sense. He wanted things to make sense, needed them to. The idea that what Diane had told him might be true brought out his worst childhood fears. All of it had to be lies. Today, he determined, he would have his neatly boxed logical explanation. "Now," Sheriff Wilson said simply. He found himself holding his breath as he stared at Diane's house and the green truck in front. He exhaled slowly. He saw the task force team gather with helmets and blast shields at the ready. Moving quickly, they hit the front door and yelled, "Police, open up!" They slammed the door open when there was no immediate response, breaking the hinges. With rifles drawn, they entered the home and disappeared inside, one at a time. Diane's evening had started like most. She showered, ate dinner, and sat down in her air-conditioned living room to relax and read a book. A stack of suspense and fantasy novels graced her coffee table. A pungent aroma filled the air with her steaming cup of coffee, freshly brewed. Diane cautiously set it on a coaster in front of her away from the books. Across the room, the spear of chaos lurked in the corner. It was still carefully wrapped and bound with the blood ruby pendant and chain. The whispers stilled for the time being. Silent and unobtrusive it sat. Diane knew it waited for its next opportunity and next victim. She did not allow herself to be lulled by its apparent lack of offense. She guarded her mind and maintained peace in her home at all times, lest she give it any opening to attack. Nearby on the fireplace mantel, a framed, smiling photograph of her grandfather sat next to another frame with a folded American flag. The African-American man pictured wore a heavily decorated airman's uniform. A newspaper clipping of the Tuskegee Airmen sat tucked into one side of the photo. Diane was proud of his accomplishments as a World War II hero. She kept his memory alive and refused to sell his collection of captured Nazi weapons and other war memorabilia he had passed on to her right before he died. Diane sighed. She let the quiet soak into her bones and let her tense muscles unknot. However, something was bothering her. She found her mind was not on the words that seemed to float along on the pages without penetrating her understanding. She closed her book and set it down to figure out what had her so distracted. It felt like the heaviness of an approaching storm around her. Later, she wasn't sure if it was a noise she barely heard or a sudden premonition that got her attention. Nearly before she could think about it, she jumped up, grabbed her gun, then slammed a clip home. Diane felt her spirit guides humming and her angel's protection. She waited with gun ready, sight trained on the front door. When the door slammed open, she didn't flinch. "Police, put your gun down," came the orders. "What the hell are you doing in my house?" Diane shouted back. "Identify yourselves. Produce your warrant or get the hell out. This is my private property. You can leave now." "You are under arrest," came the shouted reply. "Put your gun down. Put the gun down now." "You are trespassing. I've done nothing," she spat back at them. "What are the charges?" "Conspiracy, murder, assault on an officer, resisting arrest, and there's more where that came from," Sheriff Wilson said silkily while he shoved past the officers blocking the doorway and came to a stop behind the man in front with a shield. "Put your weapon down, Diane, and come peaceably like a good girl down to the jail so we can discuss it calmly." "Calmly?" She laughed bitterly. "You didn't see fit to calmly just come talk to me? You sending your bully boys to do the dirty work again." Diane lowered her weapon. "Where's a signed warrant? Let me see it, and I'll go nice and quiet to a better place to discuss these fake charges." Diane wanted to glance over her shoulder at the spear of chaos. She was becoming more acutely aware of its presence by the second. The ex-deputy realized she desperately needed to get them out as soon as possible, even if it meant accepting a false arrest. Tension tightened her shoulders as she laid her gun down. Silent prayers passed under her breath that Ulfur would remain docile and quiet until she could call someone to get the accursed artifact. Paperwork with the judge's signature was waved under Diane's nose as Officer Bennett handcuffed her. "You have the right to remain silent." She didn't bother to listen to her Miranda rights. Her eyes were on the spear, which had started whispering just below the level of audible hearing now that she was no longer in control. Dread locked her throat, knowing how bad this could turn. She worked her mouth and tried to swallow. Diane couldn't speak and didn't try. She could only hope that common sense would prevail among the officers who had rudely barged into her home. Sheriff Wilson looked around the room and followed Diane's gaze to the wrapped object in the corner. He incorrectly interpreted the cause of the look of sudden fear in her eyes. "Aha!" the sheriff gloated to himself. She was hiding something. "Search the house. Take any weapons or drugs for evidence," Sheriff Wilson ordered. In response, the officers spread out and began going room to room, opening drawers, lifting cushions, knocking papers onto the floor, and going through filing cabinets. In the living room, one of the officers threw the photo of her grandfather into the floor and stepped on it, shattering the glass and taking the World War II-era pistol off the mantel from behind it. Another officer opened a cabinet where more memorabilia was stored and dumped all of it unceremoniously into an army-style canvas sack. Diane found herself able to utter an objection. "You have no right to take my personal property," she said. "Stop! Those are family heirlooms. My grandfather was a war hero." Sheriff Wilson didn't answer her as she was shoved roughly out the door to one of the unmarked police cars. Deputy Bennett stayed behind when the other officers went to wait in the cars for further instructions. The boss's attention was on what Diane had been so interested in. He ignored Bennett. Drawn to the wrapped object in the corner, he came close, curious about the odd bundle. "What have we here?" he said aloud. "More evidence?" Laying hands on the object, he examined the jeweled chain that held the wrapping and whistled. "I bet this is worth a pretty penny. Let's see what's under it." He slipped the pendant into his pocket, leaving the chain dangling in his haste. A gleaming, light-colored shaft came smoothly to his hand. Intricate, interlocking engravings wrapped around the haft of the weapon. Further unwrapping revealed a razor-sharp, finely forged spear blade covered in Celtic knotwork and runes. "Beautiful." Sheriff Wilson let out his breath slowly. "This will make a fine addition to our evidence collection. Maybe I'll keep this one piece after we get a quick, easy conviction for maintaining an illegal arsenal, and we'll sell the rest at auction. Even with the judge's kickback, we'll still make a killing on this one confiscation. Right, Bennett?" "Yes, sir," Deputy Bennett answered, "and Stanley will be out of our hair. 2 for 1 deal." He smiled. "Got that right." Sheriff Wilson laughed. "I'll be able to pay off my new truck. This stuff is valuable." "You ready, boss?" Bennett looked around at the mess they'd created. "This one was quick and easy. We got the loot, and Stanley went down easier than I figured. We can find out what she knows when we get her to lockup." "Yeah, I'm ready." The sheriff waved his hand dismissively. "Diane's a puss. I wasn't worried about her. Women are cowards and don't need to be on the force. As for TWRA, Holiday can handle this county by himself. They don't need her. Let's go." Unnoticed by either man, the fine gold chain of the ruby necklace dangling from the passing sheriff's pocket snagged on one of the pair of rocking chairs on Diane's porch. There it stayed as the police left, twinkling in the half-light of dusk. 10 minutes later, they arrived at the Roane County Jail. They parked on Ray Street next door to the deserted county courthouse. Diane was brought to the small white building just off the darkened street and taken unceremoniously through the front entrance to the reception desk. Sheriff Wilson grinned as he followed them inside. Out of spite, he'd arranged to have Deputy Mulligan on duty. The deputy's stunned look made it worth it. The sheriff followed them in carrying the Spear of Chaos and the sack of evidence from Diane's house. Deputy Mulligan froze when he saw Diane escorted in wearing handcuffs. He stopped with the handset of the black rotary phone next to his ear. The still chattering man on the line at the other end of the conversation didn't realize he was no longer being listened to. "Hold on, Reverend. I'll be with you in a moment." Deputy Mulligan held the phone away from his ear. "Reverend," Sheriff Wilson furrowed his brow. "What's going on?" "Someone went into his church and stole his holy water," Deputy Mulligan replied. "The whole bowl and all. But they left $100 bill for a tip according to the note left behind." "What? What? He's complaining?" Sheriff Wilson burst out laughing. "Just tell him to buy a new bowl." "He says he wants the disappearance investigated, sir," Deputy Mulligan replied. His face was a serene mask, but he too had been struggling not to laugh. "It's a theft. Out of the Lord's house." Oh, jeez." The sheriff wheezed and tried to catch his breath as he wiped tears. "Stole his holy water. Now I've heard it all. Oh, Lordy." He laughed louder. "It was probably a kid in the church playing a practical joke." The Reverend, able to hear and realize he was the butt of a joke, started yelling loudly into the phone. His words became incoherent, and Deputy Mulligan held the phone further away. "Reverend, I will call you back. We have an emergency that we have to take care of," the hapless deputy tried to say and was interrupted. "Emergency? This is an emergency!" The caller's words faded again to hysterical incoherence. I'm very sorry. I understand, Reverend. We will have someone check it out, and I'll get back to you. Deputy Mulligan hung up the phone. He stared down at the still chuckling sheriff. Now, care to tell me why Officer Stanley is here in cuffs? He shifted his gaze to Diane and saw her mask of fear and stoic refusal to talk. The sheriff moved forward and shifted what he carried from his back to the side. He rested the green canvas bag on the floor and took a good grip on the spear. Deputy Mulligan's shocked response at seeing Diane in handcuffs and his rising rage at the insult to his friend paled by comparison when he realized what the sheriff had in his hands. He froze again. He barely dared to breathe. The sheriff placed the spear on the counter in front of him. Mulligan jumped away from it, sending his chair clattering across the floor. "Keep that evil thing away from me! Get rid of it before you regret it!" "It's going to the evidence locker," the sheriff said smoothly. He pretended to be unfazed, but he was inwardly puzzled by the deputy's reaction. "For now, though, I'm taking it to my office so I can record and catalog everything. We have to keep it all nice and legal-like." The deputy was insistent. "Take it back wherever you got it. Let Diane go." "You got a good reason why I should listen to you? Something you want to confess?" Sheriff Wilson asked. His cheeks reddened and a nasty expression stretched across his face. "No, I have nothing," Deputy Mulligan replied stolidly. "I haven't done anything wrong, and neither has she," he said. Looking at his friend, he saw that her horrified expression mirrored his own trepidation. "We will see," Sheriff Wilson sneered. "Now, go check this stuff in. Do your job, or you're fired." Diane slightly inclined her head and gestured with her eyes. Deputy Mulligan got the hint. Both of them knew he couldn't help her, or anyone, if he left the jail. He sent a silent prayer up and quickly did as he was told. Inwardly, though, Deputy Mulligan desperately searched for a solution. He waited stoically while Diane got checked in and her belongings taken into the sheriff's office. Finally, the sheriff slammed his office door shut, taking the Spear of Chaos with him. Deputy Mulligan was finally free to grab a moment to slip back to Diane's cell to talk to her. "Damn it, Diane, I warned you," Deputy Mulligan said quietly. "I know. I half expected it. It was my fault. My mistake for not sending the artifact to a safer place for the time being. I didn't think the sheriff would grab the spear and take it, though." Diane leaned against the bars as she spoke. "What should we do?" Mulligan asked. "You're gonna have to call in the cavalry. I'm stuck," Diane replied. "No way we're getting out of here without an incident. The only question is, how many people are getting hurt in the meantime?" "That's what I'm worried about. Who do we have able to come to get it?" he asked with a tight frown. Diane thought for a moment. "You're gonna have to call Brian Crowley. Otherwise we are on our own," Diane whispered. "Mary Lou and Ken are busy looking for solutions to our little problem, and don't know what's going on. Brian's the only other person solid enough to come in under active threat. But Brett, it gets worse." Diane swallowed and paused. "We have been attacked by some dark demon creature trying to possibly get its hands on it. It's vicious, and the monster may be attracted here. The sheriff removed the lock we put on the spear. The entity that controls that artifact is loose," Diane said. "Oh, sweet Jesus," Deputy Mulligan blanched. "What the hell has he done?" "I suspect we are about to find out." Diane shook her head grimly. "Hell might be the correct term for it. You better stop praying." "I started praying the moment that cursed thing walked in the door," he replied. "All right. Stay watchful. I'll page Brian the emergency code. If it gets bad enough, we may have to break you out of here." Deputy Mulligan went back to his station. grabbed his private pager, and sent 2 carefully coded pages to Brian's number. He also sent up a silent mental plea for Brian to get his message quickly. Busying himself with the rest of the necessary paperwork, he tried to focus on something besides the artifact in the next room. He braced himself mentally and emotionally for what he sensed coming. Luminous hands inside the oversized round clock on the wall audibly ticked away the seconds. The noise, usually just background, seemed to curl up the deputy's spine and raise goosebumps. Deputy Mulligan looked around. Nobody else seemed bothered. All he could do was wait. The deputy shivered with an imagined chill as the room seemed to get colder. He noticed his cup of fresh brewed coffee suddenly had frost on it. His eyes grew wide, and he wished he could run. Fear threatened to choke his breath. "Stop, Brett. She didn't run. You're not going to leave her in danger after she had your back," he told himself. He hunched his shoulders but pretended to keep working. "Dear God, please help us with your hand of protection," he fervently whispered. "We need you, Lord, right here in this jailhouse." Deputy Mulligan found himself again hoping that Brian would get his message in time. Was Brian enough cavalry, as Diane suggested? Deputy Mulligan acknowledged to himself that he would feel much better with an army at his back right about then. Behind the main office's closed door, the whispers in the sheriff's head got stronger. He started muttering to himself unintelligibly. Rather than put the spear in an evidence locker as he'd planned, he propped it in the corner behind his office door. Anyone entering wouldn't be able to see it or realize its presence. Satisfied, he sat down behind his desk to admire his prize. Light gleamed off the razor-sharp spear point and reflected across the room. More shadows than usual seemed to move oddly around his office. It seemed to speak to him. Knowing that this was not possible, he shook his head to clear it. "I must be getting tired," Sheriff Wilson said out loud. "I'm imagining things. It's a nice replica of a medieval weapon, that's all. Mulligan and Stanley are trying to spook me, and it isn't gonna work. This ain't no damned horror movie," he huffed. Reaching into his desk, he pulled out a stapled set of paperwork. The sudden onset of ringing in the sheriff's ears made him shake his head and wiggle his fingers in his ears. He worked his jaw, but that didn't make it stop. It grew louder instead. The bitch! This is all her fault. The thought echoed in his mind. Make her pay. She's a manipulative worm. A mere woman. Not worth anything. Keeping things from you. Your rightful property. The buzzing subsided somewhat. Focused on his paperwork, the sheriff tried to ignore the white noise in his skull. He found himself talking out loud conversationally to the spear that sat alone in the corner. "I'll make her pay all right," he told it. "She won't get you back either. You're mine now." Sheriff Wilson laughed and shook his pen at the inanimate object. He imagined it laughing. "Good. That woman doesn't deserve the power here." "Power, all right. I've got the power, and she's in a cell," Sheriff Wilson replied to his imaginary friend, the spear. The buzzing grew louder again so that he clamped his hands over both of his ears at the volume of inaudible static that no one could hear but him. "There's so much more," the voice practically roared. Creeping fear rose in his gut. The sheriff looked at the spear with watering eyes. Insidious, seditious, and corrupt, it continued to speak to him. Can be so much more," the voice wheedled. "Wealth beyond your wildest dreams. Control, admiration, master armies. Be a god." "What are you?" he whispered back. He slowly stood up behind his desk. His eyes were wide, and he found himself shaking. The means to an end. World domination. Together we will kill man, gods, and beasts of the earth. In his mind's eye, he saw fields running with blood as swords and maces rose and fell. Horses lay crippled and bellowing. Camels were cut to pieces by missiles. Atomic bombs fell, and people everywhere burned. Even giants walked the battlefield and died with the rest. The smoke scorched his nostrils, and he saw himself walking untouched with the spear held high in his hand. Victorious, the voice concluded, and went silent. Sheriff Wilson tasted bile. He struggled not to heave with sickness at the sight of so much blood and viscera. It's all in my head, he shrieked desperately. It's not real. No, I don't want any of this. I just want to retire rich where nobody is going to bother me. Leave me alone. Leave me alone, he practically sobbed. Ah, but you did not leave Diane alone. It laughed in his mind. You took her freedom, while you gave me mine. She had me bound and in her control. But because of your greed, you will die. He felt his heart pulsing. It seemed like his energy started draining away like water pouring out of a vessel. Oh my God! Sheriff Wilson's chest hurt with a sharp cramp. He fell back in his chair, squirming in pain. He found himself too breathless to call for help. His chair was violently thrown backward by an invisible force, and papers flew off his desk. Filing cabinet drawers flew open so hard they fell out, spilling their contents everywhere. The spear fell over on its own accord, and his locked office door flew open. When it did, everything stilled. There was no one near the door when the sheriff, still gasping but no longer in pain, managed to stand up. All he could see was Mulligan's white face staring at him from the reception desk. He left the spear lying where it landed and limped into the other room. The sheriff's expression screwed into a mask of fury. Though he shook with adrenaline, Sheriff Wilson drew his gun and hurried to the cell block in the back of the building. Boss, what's going on? One of the female deputies in the room inquired. Where are you going? What are you doing? Deputy Mulligan left his station to look in the office. Oh, crap, he exclaimed. When he saw the wrecked office, he turned and ran after the sheriff, who slammed the door in his face, leaving the deputy outside the cell block. The prisoners were going crazy. Many of them banged their heads on the cell bars or moaned, thrashing on the floor. Some prisoners tried to reach one another to fight. Outside the door, Sheriff Wilson could hear the police scanner suddenly chiming every few seconds as dispatch was overwhelmed with calls from Kingston and the surrounding areas. Several accidents, fights, and a shooting occupied his patrols. The sheriff took hold of himself firmly, went directly to Diane's cell, and pointed his gun at her. She was calm and still, seemingly unaffected by the chaos. Talk! He yelled at her. You hid this shit from me. What is that thing in my office that just now wrecked it? Unfazed, Diane walked forward and looked her former boss directly in the eye. I hid nothing. You chose not to believe what I told you. I told you to leave things alone. I had it under lock and controlled. You decided of your own volition to barge into my home, steal it, and set free the evil it contains. So don't blame me, Sheriff. This is your fault, Sheriff Wilson insisted. You have no business with such a dangerous object. You shouldn't have it anywhere where someone could find it, he shouted. Diane stared him down. You are shameless, So you know what? I'm not interested in this tit-for-tat. Let me out of here so I can fix your screw-up, Diane demanded. We don't have time for more blame or head games. You have no idea what you're up against. Sheriff Wilson sneered at her. You do? You think you're such hot shit. What can you do? Nothing. You can stay here till you rot. The buzzing in his ears increased again. Fire your ranged weapon, the voice said. Kill. Take control. It will be easy, and no one will care. Ah, no! His finger tightened on the trigger involuntarily. Diane saw what was happening. She ducked and waved her hand to spoil his aim telekinetically just before the gun went off. The rapport of the gun firing was excessively loud inside the cell block. A chunk flew off the painted cinder block wall behind Diane. You crazy? Snap out of it! Chef, stop! She tried shouting. She recognized the glazed look in his eyes and the paralyzed face from past incidents with the Spear of Chaos. He moved the gun around again, trying to draw down on her. Impossibly, it twisted in his hands and began to turn around to point back at him. Just like Skinwalker's death, Diane remembered. Damn it, Sheriff! Wake up! Diane screamed desperately. Outside the cell block, Mulligan found the extra keys and began to unlock the door. The sound of gunfire on the other side of the entry to the jail cells gave him pause. A voice spoke from behind him. What's going on? Deputy Mulligan glanced behind him. Reverend Dean Woody stood at the reception desk, open-mouthed. He had left the door open. The view of the street behind him revealed Brian parking his car. Oh, thank God, Mulligan muttered when he saw the blue car with the red and white light bar. Brian got out of his car with his equipment and ran across the street. Deputy Mulligan felt a short-lived sense of relief when the key finally turned in the lock to open the door. Diane was shouting. He looked in to see Sheriff Wilson with the gun nearly to his temple. Oh, God! Deputy Mulligan rushed him just in time to ruin the attempt on the sheriff's life. The resulting shot hit the ceiling and punched a hole in the drop panel of the hallway. It was enough to jar the sheriff out of his stupor. The spear let go of the man's mind, and it changed tactics. It's time. I'm here. It pulsed with energy as it again sent a blast. Everything, to the perspective of the humans present, went haywire. Chairs fell over and paperwork went flying as stacks of documents were swept off desks. The deputies and the reverend held their hands over their ears. Everyone ignored Diane's shouts to let her out. Shocked white faces tried to process what was happening. Most of the 8 or so deputies in the room could not see their foe. However, the few that could see who had known death weren't happy about the black shadows that raced through the door. Fewer still understood. Ictathier stayed true to form. Rather than grab the spear and run, he found Diane locked in her cell, frantic to escape. Not so big and bad now, are you? The daemon gloated at her. The spear is mine, and you can't stop me. I'll kill them all on my way out and feast on their marrow. He grabbed the bars and shook them. It talks to me. Loki's spear wants me. Diane snarled at him. Let me out of here, and we shall see. She changed her approach and steeled her expression. She could see beyond the open door. Oh, you mean that spear? The one that the other demon just grabbed. I think it's heading out the door. She pointed back the way Ictathier came in. You just lost your chance. If you have such a romantic relationship with it, you just got cheated on. Ictathier snarled at her with fury, but jumped away and ran out. On his way past the sheriff, the daemon took a swipe at him where he was crouched with his hands on his head sobbing. The sheriff howled in pain as the daemon laid a set of gashes down his arm. Blood dripped on the floor and soiled the boss's uniform. The good reverend, however, wasn't idle. He bravely blocked the only exit, determined to face the kind of living nightmare the cleric always thought of as a metaphor. He waved his arms, trying to remember the proper words of exorcism. Unfortunately, he'd not paid much attention to that portion of his studies in seminary. Under pressure, he was nearly, but not quite, panicked. "Oh, Jesus, help me!" he cried, gasping. Behind him, Brian tried to come in, while the daemon in front of him tried to leave. Reverend Woody found himself trapped in the middle. The daemon had a gleaming weapon in his hand that looked to the Reverend like a spear. "What did I walk into?" Reverend Woody coughed as he spoke. "Don't let it escape," Brian said urgently. "But don't let it touch you either." He drew his sidearm from the holster he'd hastily grabbed from his car and shoved an entire clip into the gun. With the safety off, he aimed upward but held his fire. Close behind him, Brian tried to get into a better position. "I need a clear shot, Reverend. There's no way to help unless I can get past you for a better angle. I can't risk hitting anyone else." Finally, pulling himself together with the help of a solid presence at his back, the Reverend shouted at the demon, "I rebuke you in the name of Jesus Christ!" It stepped back, stunned at the power in the words, but the execution was clumsy. Suddenly it was unsure. Not accustomed to being opposed by humans, it considered its next course of action. The daemon stood and stared at them defiantly, baring its dagger-like teeth. It appeared to be a half-shadow, partly misshapen humanoid dwarf to the humans. The daemon opened itself to attack by standing still. It paused a little too long for its own good. Ictathier launched himself from across the room and knocked the smaller daemon sprawling sideways, growling, "Mine!" Brian took the open opportunity to duck under the Reverend's outstretched arms. "I believe you have something that belongs to us," Brian told the two squirming demoni as he came in. He took steady aim at the rolling demoni on the floor as they bit and clawed at each other to get possession of their prize. Brian kept his physical distance, mindful of the poison that came with getting clawed. The mad whirl of violence reminded him of a cat fight. Behind Brian, Reverend Woody gathered himself together again after realizing there was not one daemon in the jailhouse, but two. He shouted louder and with more determination. "I rebuke you in the name of Jesus Christ!" In response, the two demoni rolled apart. Ictathier's attention turned to the humans. Brian saw him tense to jump at the Reverend. "Come on, bitch! Try me!" he yelled in challenge. "We have a date to dance, remember?" Instead of stepping aside when the dog-like humanoid shadow leaped at him, Brian smoothly dropped to one knee and opened fire upward from underneath. The sanctified ammunition struck Ictathier's core and blew the daemon in half. Black blood spilled across the floor and splattered over the ceiling. Brian rose, uninjured and satisfied. "You won't be going after Mary Lou again, nor any of us, now will you?" He addressed the scattered goo with grim satisfaction. "Holy moly, Brian! Now I know where that holy water went." Deputy Mulligan stared, blinking in shock. The Reverend spared a glance at the other man as the lone surviving daemon squealed in real fright. "Oh, really?" "Watch yourself, Reverend," a female voice said. Diane came up behind them without handcuffs on. "Now, how about my spear?" She addressed the remaining terrified daemon who was attempting to scramble away from them. She held her hand out expectantly. It grabbed and held onto the spear tight. "Mine!" It practically sobbed, hugging the dark artifact to its chest. Get away! Loki wants!" In the name of Jesus, get behind me, Satan! Reverend Woody yelled. Responding to the Reverend's shout, it ran. The demon did not bother to try to attack them. Solely concerned with escaping the dangerous humans, it dodged, doubled back, and ducked under Diane's snatching hands. No, I'm leaving. I'm going! It rammed into the Reverend, knocked him down flat, and fled out the door. The spear went with him. Darkness covered its clumsy escape. Damn it! Brian was furious but helpless. He holstered his weapon on his belt. I'm sorry, Brian, Diane told him apologetically. We both tried. Brian nodded and sighed in frustration. He gave her a worried look. Yes, but we failed to keep hold of the Spear of Chaos, and that's the worst outcome. How do we explain this one? He held his hand out to help the Reverend to his feet. We can't, she told him. We'll have to hope Mary Lou and Ken have a solution up their sleeve, can get it back and destroy it. They went to see Skuld, but I haven't heard from them in a few days. Diane's brows furrowed in worry. Now, about my holy water, the Reverend said.